future teams?
I mean, that's kind of why I moved over to data engineering because I kept on getting into these roles where I was the first data scientist, but
Yeah.
there's no infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to do data engineering anyway. So it's like it might as well be my job.
Yeah. Good day. Welcome to another episode of Discover Talent at Vico.net. Today I am with Thuso Simon here in Cape Town at the HR Directors Conference. Welcome, Thuso.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for accepting our invitation. I've been so looking forward to talking to you. In the past, we've spoken to data scientists, which is what you do. But I don't think we have spoken to a senior data scientist, right?
Mm,
And from that perspective, I'm looking forward to, just exploring perhaps different angles
yeah.
to what you do. But perhaps as a start, what does a day in the life of Tuso look like?
So I've moved more into data engineering now.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of doing a little bit of both data engineering and data science.
Yeah.
So I'm a technical lead for the data science team, and then I actually just do the data engineering on the as my real job.
Yeah.
So it's mostly like interacting with the team, making sure that they got tickets and have no blockers to in their way, making sure that the technical side of it is fine, so that the stats are good, their coding is good, and all that kind of a stuff. And then just getting into the work and writing emails, talking to stakeholders, deploying tests, merge requests, and all that kind of stuff. So just kind of making sure everything's working smoothly for the team so they can get their best work in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is an easier transition from a data scientist to data engineer, or the other way around, or it doesn't matter?
It depends on your background. I think if you have some math and stats, then moving from data science or data engineering to data science is pretty straightforward.
Yep.
But definitely on the going from a data engineer to data science or data scientist to data engineer, you need to be able to do the hardcore programming. So it really helps to have that software engineering background.
Yeah.
So they have two hurdles that you need to be able to accomplish to transition.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I realize that obviously through your experience up to now, you've built different skill sets, right? Machine learning, data analysis, um, the data mining, and so forth. Perhaps let's explore those, right, from a senior, experienced individual. What are some of those differences? Let's start with machine learning, which I realize is your passion as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And perhaps you can deep dive there as well as to where's that coming from.
Yeah, so machine learning is using basically statistics to um, figure out an answer. And so, like, in high school or, college statistics, you're doing it with one variable.
Yeah.
Where with machine learning, you can throw thousands or millions of variables in there. And then you have large data sets. So it's, billions of rows, thousands of customers. And at the end of the day, you're trying to make sure that you can automate a decision. So I think that's where the role of an analyst comes in,
Hmm.
is they're there to highlight and give decision makers like the way that they can, or things that they can make decisions on a daily basis. But if that gets too unwieldy, or there's too many things coming up, or the decision processes is very complicated, that's when you want to have like a person with an ML background to come in and help you take these few cases that you have for making decisions and turn that into a kind of automatic process.
Yeah.
And then on the data engineering side, it's like the pipes and the deployment and all the other kind of stuff around the data that you need to get settled before you can actually have the data analyst and data machine learning person actually work on it.
Yeah.
So
And what you're describing now is quite important because we tend to talk about these concepts and fields in a casual way,
mm,
and not spend enough time around how the value chain works,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
which becomes um, quite useful for those one that are aspiring, and quite frankly, some are in the field, but still haven't connected the dots
Yeah, yeah, of course.
as to how this works. I see that as a senior, data engineer, you are leading young, up and coming, developing, the next, young professionals. I presume leading teams.
Right.
What are some of the considerations, in that respect? What does that mean? I'm sure you spend a lot of time in that space.
Mm. So it's a lot of like so a lot of the guys I work with right now come out of academia and they have PhDs
Yeah,
and very high degrees and stuff.
yeah,
So I find with guys from that background, it's a little bit difficult to get them to remove, not hit for perfection,
okay,
because that's something you definitely do when you're in academics. You want the perfect paper. You
yeah,
want to make sure that everything is absolutely correct before
yeah,
you do anything. And I think in the business world, it's actually the opposite. You just need enough information that you can make a decision and move
correct.
on. And so it's a lot of that coaching is bringing that in. So trying to get them to build POCs and instead of full fleshed out products, and getting them to ideate and
Mm,
improve and
mm,
build off the last building stone
mm,
rather than building a platform to launch things off of. So I think that's where a lot of the leadership and experience that I've had comes in play, because yeah, you can't build an expert system. You can't be
yeah,
Google uh, with one person,
yeah,
and you can't
yeah,
do everything at once. So you need
yeah,
to break it up into small pieces and then build on it.
yeah. I mean, that's a very good insight there, right? In the sense that in the business world, perfection, I don't want to say comes later, but you strive for it along the way.
Mm,
You just need enough and sufficient information, to your point, to make a decision.
yeah.
So that's one learning point of those transitioning across. Um, would you say the because you also get organizations, right, that would, for lack of better term, looking for ready-made talent.
Mm.
Is that unfair?
A little bit. So it just depends on like what you can train a person on, what skill sets you have at the company to train them on, and what skills they're coming with. So if someone's coming in with, so I get this a lot with data engineers.
Mm.
They usually come from a software engineer background, and now they need to learn the data part of it.
Yeah,
So the data sense takes like 2 or 3 years to just get into it. It's a little bit difficult to figure it out. So I'd say that's a lot harder than teaching someone, a new library or a package,
yeah,
or even like SQL, which is the language of
yes,
data. So if someone can come in without SQL, that's fine. Like that's something you can learn. Maybe 2 months into the job, you'll be an expert. But learning like having a data sense, that's something
yeah,
deeper. And I think you can get a data set even using Excel. You don't need to use fancy tools to get it. It's
yeah,
just understanding and not trusting your data unless you really interrogate it.
yeah, yeah. And I say this in the context of our high unemployment and skill shortage, right?
Mm,
That there's a bit of an irony there. So on the one side, you have granted perhaps not sufficient numbers coming through into the sector, but those that are coming through, there are also barriers
mm,
where we're looking for that experience, and kind of building up now there on the unemployment queue, whereas we could have taken a chance with them to say, hang on a second. Well, firstly, these are young careers,
yeah,
in itself.
yeah, yeah,
So we can't expect that we will be so developed in it. But also, we've got I suppose, secondly, the understanding of, well, if you have this core, we can work on this,
yeah,
right? So that education in organizations, I presume it's still work in progress in understanding your needs and the type of talent to complement that.
yeah. And I think some of the best people I've worked with are completely self-taught. They're the ones that read books and
Yeah,
learned C++ from a book or something, and then figured everything else out. And those guys are really amazing that they can do it without any formal training, and they're usually better when they come through because they don't have the same knowledge that we all have. They come from problems a little bit differently, and so it adds to the diversity of your skill set that you have in your organization.
Absolutely. And self-taught, I suppose, um, you I might be wrong, your creativity, your innovation might be slightly higher as well, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because you haven't conformed to some of the norms as yet.
yeah, exactly. And and you may not have the same depth. That's the only thing that
Yeah.
kind of lacks is the depth of knowledge, but the breadth and application of it is usually what actually matters.
Yeah. And when you did your undergrad degree in New Mexico, right? Um, did you know this is the what you want to follow from high school into university, or you just discovered this by chance along the way?
I don't think data science was even a thing back then. That's how fast this field is
Yeah,
changing. No, I primarily just wanted a challenge, and physics seemed cool. So I took the challenge there, and then yeah, the more I got into it, the more I realized I needed to program, and then I realized that I needed statistics to figure out what's happening in the
yeah,
programs, and then it kind of just organically built until I was able to have all the skill set that I
yeah,
needed. But yeah, there wasn't necessarily a specific roadmap or anything that I was following.
yeah,
I was just trying to stay out of real work and follow my passion for
yeah,
that period of time.
yeah. And I deliberately raised that because once again, part of the education is that whilst data science in itself, as an example, is a newer career, but the building blocks, those have been around for quite a while, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's part of the education there in organizations, because it may have been statistics at the beginning, some
Mm.
actuarial science, behind that,
Yeah, exactly.
engineering, and so forth. And over time, you've built on top of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's basically how it goes.
And, 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 and we'll continue to build on that because for us, it's part of challenging organizations to self educate, and realize that when we talk about skill sets in these fields, it's about the evolution thereof,
Mm.
not necessarily that you will get a ready packaged data engineer.
And it,
You might get them, um, but when you look back, if you're looking for them en masse, no, they came with different packages and they've had to put it together in order to have what they have today.
yeah, and it's also the field is changing so fast. 2 years ago, nobody heard of a large language model,
Mm,
and now that's almost like a requisite on your
mm,
CV to get a job, and it wasn't invented until very recently.
yeah,
So it's also like the speed of things are changing, and in order to predict what you're going to need in a couple years is almost impossible.
yeah,
But I do think the basics of math and statistics and programming, as long as you have that basics, you can learn and evolve to whatever skill set you need
yeah,
for
yeah.
these kind of roles.
No, absolutely. Now, for your master's, you did an interesting research, right? You developed a normal frequentist and Bayesian methods. Now, tell us more. What is that?
So X-ray data is basically there's tons of it,
Okay.
right? So they've had a bunch of telescopes out there, and they've just been dumping data in databases. So we wanted to find new sources in there, uh, and so I kind of did a little bit of statistics in
Okay.
my undergrad, but this was actually like full-on statistics. So we developed a couple different methods for um, finding these sources, and one of them happened to be Bayesian because Bayesian was at the rage then. That was the big thing
Yeah.
10 years ago. So we were trying to get on the hot ticket there and try to get a paper out of it. So we did a lot of that. At the end, we did a lot of like shortcuts and stuff like that, and we got too many false positives. So the method wasn't super useful, but it was
Yeah.
still like really powerful to learn all that stuff. Like I caught my computer on fire from all the processing I was doing,
Yeah.
and yeah, a lot of like statistics and getting really into the number crunching and how to drive these things from scratch. So that really helped with that project.
No, exciting. And now you busy with your doctorate?
No, no, I started a doctorate, but I never finished it.
Okay. And if you had to do a research topic now, with how things are evolving so fast, what would interest you?
Uh, I don't know. Like the world of astronomy is changed a lot. Now there's this new Hubble tension out there about the different rates of the universe expansion.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure there's smart people working on that. I think it's part of the reason I got out. Like the problems in astronomy were really interesting, but they didn't do anything besides being like really useful for our general knowledge and our
Yeah.
place in the universe. And there are some downstream applications that help, but I wasn't really interested in taking it further.
Okay.
And so that's what kind of the crux of me not finishing or finishing
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And I just found that my main passion is like solving complicated problems with statistics and computers.
Yeah.
So as long as I was doing that, I'm happy.
Yeah. And in solving, I mean, all of this is about solving problems, right?
Mm.
Ultimately, what has been your biggest challenge so far?
So I think a lot of it has been in this kind of uh, career progression that I've been trying to do lately. So I've gone up to being head of data for a couple of times, and then I'll go back to being an individual contributor,
Okay.
and then go back to it. And I find that there's parts of it that I miss, and some parts that are really challenging when you are head of data. Um, so yeah, for me, that's a lot of the battle I'm having is, oh, it's cool to make decisions and have your hands in everything,
Yeah.
but then the work, and then you're not able to do stuff, and you feel like you're losing your technical abilities are really troubling. But then when you're an individual contributor, you just got to work on your stuff, and you
Yeah.
can't be too busy about everything. So yeah, that's the trade off that I'm really battling with right now.
Yeah, and and um, and I'm happy you went there because at some point, right, as an individual contributor, as a specialist, and for the love of it, right,
Mm,
as you progress, because that's your, can I call it your claim to fame? Uh, and as you progress through the ladder, where you start becoming more generalist,
mm,
right? There is one, the fear of missing out,
yeah, yeah,
but also because you don't work technically every day, you almost feel like, well, is my am I still as skilled,
yeah, yeah.
in this area, but at the same time balance it with the role of leadership,
Yes.
right? Which could be different to the technical side of things. But I presume it's not either or, right? You need both.
You definitely need both in the data field because you have to know what people are talking about, and so you're leading a team of highly
Okay.
skilled and highly technical people.
Yeah.
So you need to keep up and be abreast of what they're doing enough that you can make decisions
Yeah.
on it. But then yeah, the leadership is also a challenge,
Yeah.
and managing people and making sure that their needs are met
Yeah.
and there's no blockers around them.
Yeah. And how do you bridge that gap? Because part of the feedback we're getting from organizations is the disconnect of language between the technical teams and decision makers.
Mm,
You know, where, you know, at times it could feel like unreasonable expectations, where in some quarters, the technical guys are seen as magicians to say,
mm,
well, you've got all these tools, what's the answer? You know, give us the decision,
yeah.
right? Where the lines get blurred as to who should be making the decision, but also is it understood what we've mined or what we're presenting? What could be done to ease that within organizations?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the role of the head of the data. So they are the data translators. So whatever business kind of requests are coming in, they can translate that into the technical parts that need to be
Yeah,
done in the team, and then vice versa. If we have a new finding or there's a really big issue with the data that nobody really understands,
yeah,
they need to translate that into like a business context, and make sure that it actually gets the resources that it needs to be solved. So I do feel like that's a big part of that role also is because you're in those meetings with the C-level guys and the decision makers when you're the head of data,
yeah,
and you need to be able to eloquently explain why your team is suffering or struggling or they're doing really good, and even though nobody's able to see it.
yeah. No, absolutely. And the investment in some of, I mean, there's, earlier you alluded to, there's so much happening, so much evolution is
Mm.
moving at a fast pace. Um, are organizations in general investing enough in some of those tools, right, and systems? Because to keep up, surely you can't be crunching everything on Excel.
Yeah, I do think there's a place for Excel, but it's a bit of a trade off. So I think like anything, a team can get bloated and bogged down with process,
Okay.
and the process becomes a problem. So you start to slow down,
Yeah.
even though you have you're throwing more resources at it.
Yeah.
Um, and I did have a friend that was kind of trying to solve this problem where they had teams of teams and teams trying to solve, and producing as much work as 10 teams should do instead of producing the work they were producing.
Yeah.
So that scaling up of the teams and building a team that's robust and can actually improve as you put more resources into it is very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think I've quite figured it out either, but there is something about DevOps in there and how they crunch through tickets and are able to keep things up, and also the way that engineers work. And I think it just needs a little bit of a synergy between a couple of those different methodologies to actually make sure that you have a robust data team. Because even data analysts and data scientists and data engineers, they work in completely different manners.
Yeah.
So giving them like a singular task or a way of working, it will have benefits in some places and detriments in others.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that an extension of your role as the head of data to create those synergies amongst all of those teams? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's knowing is bringing the operational kind of component to your data team. So you have models in production. Now you need to make sure that you're receiving new requests for features on that model, new features for your data systems, so you can produce better reports and monitor them and have the data quality. And then also being able to have all these teams talk to each other because they're working on wildly different parts of the machine, and they need to know what each other are doing. So it's all of that. It's
Yeah.
bringing the team together, having them communicate in a singular language, and also like getting them to
Mm.
listen to business and get new requests from business in and
Yeah.
done in a timely manner.
Yeah. I mean, at this conference here, the HR Directors Conference, you've got heads of human capital,
Mm,
you know, that are responsible for organizational design, talent management, and all of that. If they're to build a team, right? Where do they start? Um, Obviously, it goes without saying that it will be nuanced on what's the journey of that organization, right,
yeah.
and understanding the needs. But if you had to start somewhere, right? Where do you start first? Is it with the analysts? Is it with the engineers? Is it with the scientists? Is it you with me? Because I
Yeah.
think that's what organizations are equally grappling with, where they are finding that they're starting to build these teams, and along the way they say, "Wait a minute, do I have the right combination?
Mm,
Maybe I needed more of this and less of this, right? And so forth." What should they be thinking about before they start building
yeah.
future teams?
I mean, that's kind of why I moved over to data engineering because I kept on getting into these roles where I was the first data scientist, but
Yeah,
there's no infrastructure.
yeah,
So I ended up having to do data engineering anyway. So it's like it might as well be my job.
yeah,
So I think that's the place to start is make
yeah,
sure you usually have someone that's already needing reports or something.
yeah,
And so you'll probably have someone that's able to do a little bit of data munging. So it'd be good to team up the data engineer with that person. It can be a DevOps person that's kind of making sure all the systems are working, or
yeah,
you're kind of product analyst or something like
mm,
that. And then once you have a couple data engineers, then it's good to get in some data analyst. And the data analyst can help you like make those decisions quicker with more information, and then you'll start seeing that there's actually issues with your data,
mm,
and then you'll need to get more data engineers to help you fix those issues, and then eventually you'll start building metrics and KPIs around your data.
mm,
And I think when that part is kind of solidified, that's when the data scientists come in
yeah,
because they can see those KPIs, they can predict how they move and change over time, and with that, you can start automating a lot of these processes. And it doesn't have to be a stage. You can
Yeah.
have a lot of you do want a lot of like overlap
Yeah.
because these processes can take years.
Yes.
You know, like a decent data journey at least takes 3 years.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of start staging them, and it's very difficult to find good data people. So it's also, you know, if you do find good talent, you might as well just bring them in
Yeah.
because you'll probably need them in a couple of years. But yeah, it's just
Yeah.
being able to have that roadmap of what you're going to build and when you're going to build it, and
Yeah.
definitely starting with the basic
Yeah.
infrastructure that the data engineers can lay down.
Yeah. But there's a tension in there, right? Because on the one hand, because of the war for talent, you're tempted to land grab
Mm,
and bring them in because there's not enough of them. You're trying to take them off the job market.
yeah,
At the same time, they walk in, you're not ready for them,
yeah.
right? Um, and they disengage.
But I would say it's better to have someone where you have like a plan to have the data in 6 months. And this is mostly the problem with like a data scientist. If they come in and your data infrastructure is not ready for predictive analytics or anything
Yeah.
like that, you'll probably lose them
Yeah.
within a year because they'll
Yeah.
get bored and move on. But if you have a plan to have the data, and they can be part of the process of building the data that they need into that structure,
Mm.
that's better because then they're kind of the architects of that,
Mm.
rather than coming to a system that's already been built and there may not be everything there. So then they spent 6 months anyways trying to get it into a state.
Yeah.
So
And I'm happy you've shared that insight because retention of these rare skills, right, critical
mm,
skills, becomes the next important thing. So it
mm,
was one thing to bring them in, but to retain them, it's equally important.
yeah,
And it's not just about how fantastic the organization is and the culture and so forth. At the end of the day, they want to play with stuff, right?
yeah,
So you
yeah.
got to give them within reason. We do understand that you can't provide everything, but you have to provide that keyword that you mentioned, sufficient,
Mm,
enough for them to work with and get excited.
yeah, exactly. So it's a bit difficult. I've heard some places doing like 10% time where the data guys get to play 10% of the time. But at the end, you have to have something that you can present to the team or something.
Yeah,
I think that makes it nice. But a lot of times, like the only way you can figure out what's possible with the data is actually by using it. So if you're all the time working on one type of project and you never explore outside of that, you
yeah,
won't know that it's possible to do
yeah,
these different combinations.
yeah,
And something I learned from my PhD is to always have like 5 or 6 kind of things in a bag. So when they're needed or someone starts talking about it, you can bring it out and spin
yeah,
it up really quickly rather than you have to learn how to do it. You
yeah,
have to get the data. You have to make sure all these things are ready. Where you already kind of have that pre-planned a little bit. You did a POC or a micro POC,
yeah,
and then you can just spin that up really quickly after someone asks for it.
yeah. And do you find that decision makers, executive teams, and so forth, are they progressively taking you seriously, or there's still a bit of skepticism, right? To say, well, I hear you've produced all these data sets, right, and so forth, but that's not how our business works, right? Almost kind of questioning the data,
Mm,
right? And the credibility thereof and the sources thereof, right? And so forth,
yeah.
where you almost feel like you're on the defense as opposed to embracing it.
Mm. I mean, it's hard because I think any process of using code to build something, you fundamentally are in a software process. So that means the first version you release of it's gonna be buggy. There's gonna be mistakes. It's
Yeah,
gonna be not able to work right. And so that's usually when you get a lot of the emails from people. It's like, hey, why is this data wrong?
yeah,
But as the system gets more mature, hopefully it'll get better. But it is becoming one of the core concepts of data is how do you test and validify your data before you do that.
yeah,
And there's been a lot of tools that have been released around this, like data catalogs and data quality checking and data dashboards that can help you get that impression. But I think that's it also, as head of data, you usually end up being the person that's vouching for your data. You're always looking at the numbers to make sure they're right, and you're the one that usually finds the bugs, hopefully before other people. so you can go and get them fixed and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. And you're president of the machine learning. Is it a club or
Yeah, it's a society
it's a,
kind of club thing.
yeah? And how's that going? What do you guys do? What is the purpose?
So when I started machine learning, I realized there was no other people. Well, I was like the first person in the market basically doing this role.
Yeah,
So no one in my network really had worked in this industry. We're all brand new to the field.
yeah,
And so there's no community around us to help us out when we're trying to figure out business and how it works and stuff.
yeah,
So I started this club up with a couple other guys about so we could have this community of people that could help each other out with the basic struggles we all have
yeah.
in business. And now we got about 2,000 members in Cape Town. So I think it's the largest one in Cape Town, and we've kind of lost a little bit of steam since COVID because
Okay.
we couldn't have our meetups as much, but
Yeah,
they're starting to come back.
yeah,
And so we're just trying to be a little bit more of a technical kind of team, also with networking and
yeah,
stuff like that. But yeah, so we were able to like have deep dives on certain topics, and then you can be an expert or a novice in that field and still go in and get something out of it. So I like that about it.
yeah.
And lately, we've been having a lot of talks about the generative AI stuff, which have been quite cool. And we're partnering with different organizations to book out spaces with them so they can also show what they're doing
Yeah,
and showcase all the cool stuff that they're working on so they can entice talent into their team.
yeah. And it's another way of staying relevant and up to date of what's happening out there, right?
Mm.
Because it's moving at such a big pace.
And it's also good to have a network.
Yeah,
Like if you have a network of data people, if you do have a problem with something, instead of going out into the internet and trying to find a network, you can have a local one in Cape Town that can help you out.
yeah.
And we're talking about doing some papers and working on more of these tools that are becoming more popular, so people can get introductions into them. Because I think everything's just so new right now that it's hard to get a university program off of it.
No, absolutely. So the network actually becomes the catalyst, right?
Hmm.
Because everything is so new.
Yeah.
It's you figuring it out along the way, doing it along the way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and these guys are also people that are working hard in these same issues. So you might get new ideas of how to solve it or new ways of implementing it, which is also really cool because I don't think even the big players like Google really know what to do with all this new tech.
yeah, yeah. And in your spare time, what do you do?
So I brew beer, drink wine, and walk on the beach mostly.
And what type of beer? So during COVID, I presume you did a lot of brewing, probably.
Yes, a lot. When I could get supplies in.
Well, you should bring some for us next time.
Mm,
But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thuso Simon, it's been a pleasure.
thanks.
It's good to be interacting with you because you've been in this for quite a while
Mm,
as a senior, experienced data engineer, data scientist. And all the best with your society. We're looking forward to collaborating with you in the future.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.